What's up, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of Brewing with 50 bucks. This is the show where we take your favorite commanders, we slap on a $50 budget, and not only do we create a 100 card list for your deck, but we also make a deck that is also viable to win within the $50 restriction. My name is Stefan. I'm coming to you from the General Warfare headquarters. Today is the official release day of 2021's last Magic set in Estrad, Crimson Vow. Like I showed you guys last week, we have a multitude of different commanders that has come out over that time, but we're taking a look at one specific one today. And which commander are we going to be looking at? Well, you've seen the thumbnail and you've seen the title of this video, so let's get right into it. It's Toxrill the Corrosive. As I mentioned to you in that very video, you can check it up on the top right hand side of your screen right now. This is one of my favorite designs of all, not only this set, but I think of all year on a card, because not only do you get a lot of token creation with this, but also hampers your opponents as well, and you get to draw cards off it. It's an all-in-one encompassing thing. This reminds me of a lot of different cards smashed into one card itself, and I absolutely love it, so I made a deck around it. Now, given the fact that it is, as of the current price, around $13, it may fluctuate by the time this video goes up, or it may decrease by the time this video goes up, so we're building around the preemptive price of this commander. So with that, let's get into the video, shall we? So, Toxrill the Corrosive is a 7/7 for 5 black legendary slug horror with, at the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token, and for blue and a black and sacrifice a slug, draw a card. As you can tell with Toxrill, he loves to give -1/-1 counters on our opponent's creatures, create slugs, and use those slugs for value to draw you extra cards. So how we're going to be building this deck is basically giving our opponent's creatures, killing off our opponent's creatures, and getting enough slugs for us to draw our entire deck, or a good portion of it, to where we can actually win the game with it. And as always, we are running this deck with a $50 budget in mind, which includes the price of the commander, which excludes the price of the basic lands. We also offer a $5 overage compromise, which basically means that you could build this deck for $50, but most people have an extra $5 to add to this deck, so that's why we give that compromise for the deck. You can find the deck list of this video in the show notes down below, and don't forget to like this video, share it amongst your friends, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon to be notified of every future video that comes out of the channel. So we are going to be going through the rudimentary categories with creatures, instants, sorceries, artifacts, enchantments, and lands. And in this video, we're going to get started with our most populated category, our creatures. This is a creature-focused deck, so it just makes sense for our creatures to be the most populated category of this deck. We're going to get started off with Blighted Agent. So this is a card all the way from New Phyrexia. With this, a 1/1 for 1 and a blue with Infect. And Blighted Agent is unblockable. So ultimately, Infect is an alternate win con in this deck. With a lot of the proliferate cards you're going to be seeing in this deck, it makes sense for us to add Infect to this deck, and Blighted Agent being unblockable does aid in us getting there a lot quicker to the 10 poison counters that we need to kill our opponents. Next is Clockbridge Troll, an 8/8 for 3 black troll with trample and haste. The main reason I'm adding this card to the deck is that it gives your opponents 0/1 goats, and at your end step with Toxrill, giving your opponent's creatures -1/-1. Those tokens that you're giving your opponents will become tokens that you're giving yourself. Next is Core Prowler, another Infect card in this, but when it dies or is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you get to proliferate. This is one of the main ways we're going to be able to proliferate on not only the Infect counters that we're giving our opponents, but also the slime counters that we're giving our opponents. That way, their creatures are dying quicker, we're getting more slugs, and their poison counters are increasing as well, making them more afraid of us. Next we're looking at is Eloy's Nefarious Sleuth, a 4/4 for 5 mana. Basically, whenever another creature you control dies, you investigate. With Toxrill, when we're sacrificing our slug tokens, we're getting not only to draw a card, but we also get an investigate trigger, meaning we get to create a clue artifact that allows us to sacrifice the artifact to draw an extra card. And whenever we sacrifice a token, again, with Toxrill, you're sacrificing a token, you get to surveil one. So you can stack the triggers to whether you're drawing the card or you're surveilling. Next Next is Falkenroth Noble. This is just a mainstay in any token deck or aristocrat deck. Whenever another creature dies, or even Falkenroth Noble dies, you get to make a targeted player lose a life, and you gain a life as well. It just makes sense with the amount of creatures that we're going to be getting rid of on our opponent's side of the field, and the slugs that we're going to be sacrificing as well. Next is Flux Channeler. This is another great card I decided to put in this deck, basically for the reason that whenever you're casting a non-creature spell, there is an abundance of non-creature spells in this deck. You get to proliferate, and especially so, as I mentioned, in the same way with Core Prowler, you're giving more slime counters to your opponent's creatures. You're going to be able to kill them off quicker, giving yourself slug tokens, and you're going to be able to proliferate on those infect counters. Next is Giza, Glorious Resurrector. With this might be a non-bow with a couple of cards in this deck. However, the ability of her allowing your opponent's creatures to get exiled, that way any recursion deck will be screwed out of their mainstay. Not only that, but a secondary ability is you get to put all creature cards exiled with Giza onto the battlefield under your control, and they gain Decayed. So ultimately, you get to constantly do the triggers with Giza, and the fact that you're getting your opponent's creatures whenever you kill them off is just extra fodder for you as well to go wild and go ham on your opponents. Next we're looking at is Guild Pack Informant. Basically the reason I added this is just the proliferation trigger. Again, a lot of what we want to do is proliferate on those counters and basically get our opponents to as close to death as we possibly can, and to completely nullify our opponents from having creatures on the board themselves. Harvester of Soul is next. So whenever a non-token creature dies, you can draw a card. Basically with this, when we're killing off our opponent's creatures, we get to draw cards based on that. Next we're looking at is Hunted Phantasm. If you've seen my Freddy brew before, you know that a lot of the hunted cards are very interesting. This one is no different, basically giving it unblockable, and when it comes to play, you create 5 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. You want to basically play the Hunted Phantasm while Toxrill is on the field, because you can always play it, get those tokens, Toxrill goes to your end step, gives them -1/-1 counters, they die, and you get 5 slugs, basically for 3 mana. Next we're looking at is Kel's Fight Fixer. With this, whenever you sacrifice a creature, we could pay either a blue or black and draw an extra card. So whenever we're using Toxrill's ability, we get to pay an extra blue mana and we get to draw an extra card. And for 1 mana and sacrifice a creature, we can protect Kells from any board wipes or kill spells by giving her indestructible. Next we're looking at is Lazav, Dimir Mastermind. This one is an interesting one. This is one of the only cards that interacts with our graveyards or even our opponent's graveyards. With this, whenever a creature card is put to opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you can have Lazav become a copy of that creature. So whenever you kill off something with Toxrill, you get to copy it. If it's either a value-based card or if it's just a big scary creature, Lazav will just become that creature. Next we're looking at is Massacre Girl. With this is one of the few board wipes we are running in this deck. Basically, the reason why we're running this is that the -1/-1 effects stack for each slug token. The -1/-1, especially killing the slugs the first time, and then it stacks to -2, -3, so on and so forth. Next we're looking at is Omnithopter of Paradise. This is the only mana dork that we're running. For 2 mana, you get to, it has flying, which gives it evasion, and you get to tap for any mana of any color, and it's a 0/2. Not many mana dorks allow this. Next we're looking at is Plague Stinger, another infect card, but this one has flying and for 2 mana. Basically a lot of the infect cards that we have are very low costed. That way we get early damage in with the infect, and then when Toxrill comes on the field or any card with Proliferate comes on the field, we get to stack and we get to grow those counters from there. Next we're looking at is Sangromancer. This is a very good value engine to add in this deck. Basically, whenever a creature an opponent control dies, you get to gain the 3 life. So whenever Toxrill is getting rid of your opponent's creatures, you're getting 3 life, and whenever an opponent discards a card, you can gain 3 life. Ultimately, the most notable one is the opponent's creatures dying, you're getting 3 life. So even with this paired off with the Hunted Phantasm and Toxrill, basically you're going to be gaining 15 life off 1 card. Slaughter Specialist is next. This is another card that gives your opponents tokens, 1/1 tokens mostly. And with Toxrill, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on the specialist herself. So again, whenever your opponent's creatures are dying, you're getting more value off it, especially in this case, making Slaughter Specialist much, much bigger. Sludge Monster is next, and this is just a perfect pairing with Toxrill. So whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you put a slime counter on up to one other target creature. And non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power toughness 2. Sludge Monster basically pairs with Toxrill so well. Basically, whenever it enters the battlefield, you're just putting a slime counter on a creature, and they lose their abilities ultimately. So with Toxrill, within 2 turns, they're dead. Or with something that gives proliferation or proliferates, creature's gonna be dead within a turn. Solemn Simulacrum is next. This is just extra value, giving you an extra land on the field and an extra card to your hand. Everyone loves a sad robot, and that's why he's here in the list. Sir Conrad the Grim is next, and this is another good card I decided to add in the deck. Basically, whenever another creature dies or anything of the matter, you're dealing extra damage. This is the same as Falkenroth Noble, and with this, you're basically adding on to the Aristocrat drain and such. Thrumming Bird is next, and whenever it deals combat damage, you proliferate. Again, another proliferate card, but we not need to say more about it. But having flying on 1/1 for 2, still really good. Viral Drake is up next. This one has flying and infect, and basically for 4 mana you get to proliferate. And this is not a tap ability, so you could do this multiple times a turn if you so want. And with proliferate and infect on 1 card, this is a very scary card for our opponents. Next, we're looking at is Whisper Blood Liturgist. With this, I decided to add this basically to get any cards that go to the graveyard. We get to sacrifice 2 slug tokens and bring one of our main value pieces back on the field. The last card we're looking at for our creatures is Zulaport Cutthroat. The same thing with Sir Conrad and Falkenroth Noble. And basically, whenever it or another creature dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So with this, we're adding on an extra Aristocrat ability. The next category we're looking at is our instants. With this deck, we want to be very fast active, and considering Toxrill comes out at a very late turn, we want to be as quick as we possibly can to not only respond, but we also want to be able to interact with our opponents as well. First card we're looking at is Aetherize. So whenever your opponents are attacking you, get to return all attacking creatures to their owner's hand. This is a very good card against go wide decks, basically token decks or anything of the sort that's trying to go very big, very wide, and attack for very lethal. You get to use this card and just nullify the entire attack itself. Next we're looking at is 3 cards, basically Altar's Reap, Costly Plunder, and Village Rites. So all of these have an additional cost to sacrifice a creature, all for them to draw you 2 extra cards. These are very good abilities, especially when you're getting rid of your slug tokens to get extra cards in your hand. Next we're looking at is Counter Squall. Counter target non-creature spell for 2 mana for a blue and a black. Its controller loses 2 life. This is one of the few counter spells we're running in the deck. Basically, since we have access to blue, we have to run counter spells in this deck. It's like law almost. And with the Counter Squall for 2 mana to counter a target non-creature spell, it's really strong. Disdainful Stroke is next. 2 mana to counter target spell with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Another good blue card that has come out over the last couple of years that I add in almost every blue deck that I put in. Fact or Fiction is next. I've talked about this card so much on this channel, but I do believe this is a blue staple card. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and opponent separates those cards into 2 piles, and you put 1 pile in your hand and the other into your graveyard. Every blue deck I know and every blue deck I've played against runs this card. If you're not running this card, what's wrong with you? Frantic Search is next. This is just a great card to add to draw 2 cards, discard 2, and then untap up to 3 lands. Basically, this is allowing you to rummage your hand. If you don't like what you have in your hand, you get to draw some extra cards as well. Fuel for the Cause is our most expensive counterspell at 4. However, it counters a spell and then it proliferates. So it's just good, I find, especially in a deck that wants extra proliferation. Go for the Throat is an easy add in this deck, basically destroying target non-artifact creature. Grave Affliction is another funny card I decided to add in this deck. You put a -1/-1 counter on target creature and then you proliferate. So basically it is a pseudo Toxrill slime counter on it, and you get to proliferate as well. So you're adding on to the extra slime counters and the extra -1/-1 counters on there. Heartless Act is another funny card. Basically, you get to destroy a target creature with no counters on it, or you remove up to 3 counters from a target creature. Basically, you're going to be using this mostly to destroy a creature Lazotep plating is something that protects not only you, but your permanents as well if there's a mass target. Basically with this, you get to amass and create a zombie army token, and you and your permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. That way you won't be targeted, your board won't be targeted, and that way you can fizzle any spells that targets specifically you. Mana Leak is another very good budget counter spell. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Negate is another card I add in every single blue deck. Counter target non-creature spell for 2 mana. Polymorphous Jest is just an absolute troll card against your opponents, especially if they have a go wide strategy, as I was mentioning before. With each creature, target player controls losing all abilities and becoming a 1/1 blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1 until end of turn. That way you could do this at your second main phase if you really have the mana for it. And then end step, Toxrill will add those -1/-1 counters, and based on how many creatures there are, basically you get that many slug tokens as well. Saw It Coming is a great spell from Kaldheim. I use almost exclusively in my blue decks. You get to counter target spell for 3 mana, and for 2 mana you get to foretell it and you can cast it at a later turn. Steady Progress is a great card I decided to add in. Basically for 3 mana you get to proliferate and draw a card. It's really good in blue. The last card we're going to be talking about is Unwind. You get to counter target non-creature spell for 3 mana and untap up to 3 lands. So it basically pays for itself. The next category we're going to be getting into today is our artifacts. Basically, most of the artifacts that we're running in here is just extra ramp, so we're gonna get straight into it with both Charcoal Diamond and Sky Diamond. Both these artifacts cost 2 mana and they come into play tapped, and they add either a black or a blue respectively. Commander Sphere is next, allowing you for 3 mana, allowing you to add a mana of any color in your commander's identity and get to sacrifice it to draw an extra card. Contagion Clasp is a great card to add in this, especially being it's so budget friendly. And when it enters the battlefield, you put a -1/-1 counter on it on a target creature, and then for 4 mana and tap it to proliferate. The same cost as Viral Drake to proliferate a card, but with an artifact, it's less easy to get rid of, technically speaking. Everflowing Chalice is just a great card to add, especially with a deck that is very big on mana. Basically, you get to multi-kicker 2, and it enters with a charge counter for each time it was kicked, and then you add a colorless for each charge counter on it. Genesis Chamber is just an interesting card I decided to add in this deck. Basically, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield and the Genesis Chamber is untapped, that creature's controller creates a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact token. So the reason I added Genesis Chamber in this deck basically is to give our opponents some mirrors. That way, whenever Toxrill activates at the beginning of each end step, giving you some extra slug tokens. Mind Stone is next. Tap for 2 mana, tap it to add a colorless, or 1 and tap it to sacrifice it to draw a card. Replicating Ring is another great card from Kaldheim. For 3 mana, you get to tap it for add 1 mana of any color, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a night counter on Replicating Ring. If it has 8 or more night counters on it, you remove all of them, and then create 8 colorless snow artifact tokens named Replicating Ring with add 1 mana of any color. So, with the amount of proliferation we have in this deck, getting to 8 night counters on Replicating Ring is not going to be that difficult to do, especially with cards like Contagion Clasp and with Viral Drake as well. You're going to be able to proliferate once each turn if you so deem it. Soul Ring is next. We all know what this does. 1 mana, tap it to add 2 colorless. It is a staple in every commander deck. Star Compass is next. I'm surprised how budget this card has become recently. It enters the battlefield tapped for 2 mana, but you get to add 1 mana of any color that's a basic land you could produce. And lastly, Worn Power Stone, coming into play tapped for 3 mana, but you get to add 2 colorless mana to it. The next category we're going into is our sorceries. We are running a total of 8 sorceries in this deck, and each of them are very, very interesting. We're gonna start off with Caressa Phyrexia. This I just find is gonna be a good troll card for somebody who is at 7 to 8 poison counters. With this, you get to have your opponent draw 3 cards, lose 3 life, and get 3 poison counters, basically killing them off almost immediately. Next, we're looking at his Contentious Plan. For 2 mana, you get to proliferate and draw a card. It's basically 1 mana less steady progress and at sorcery speed, but it's still good nonetheless. Curse of the Swine is another great card, basically getting to exile creatures your opponents control and turning them into 2/2 green bacon creatures, boar creature tokens. Feed the Swarm is a sorcery speed kill spell. You get to destroy a creature or enchantment your opponent controls and you lose life based on the mana value of that permanent. Mass Diminish basically is another Polymorph's Jest, but it doesn't remove the abilities. It just gives your opponent's creatures based power and toughness 1/1. Sign in Blood is a black staple card for 2 black mana. Target player draws 2 cards and then loses 2 life. Tezzeret's Gambit is 3 and a Phyrexia mana, which can either be paid with a blue mana or 2 life. Draw 2 cards, then proliferate. As you can tell, we have a lot of proliferation cards in this deck. Last card we're running in our sorcery list is Treasure Cruise. Delve, and you get to exile a card for each card in your graveyard to diminish this card's casting cost by 1. You draw 3 cards. Really good card. Our next category is our smallest category with 3 enchantments. So we'll get straight into it. The first one is Arcane Adaptation. This is one of our most costly cards in the deck, not in terms of mana value, but in terms of real world money. But with this, you get to choose a creature type, and creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types. And so you get to, for this, you just choose Slug. That way, if any one of your opponents are targeting your cards that are not slugs, you get to sacrifice them to draw an extra card, if you so want. Next is Infernal Genesis. I thought this was just a funny card to add in. For 6 mana, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, they put the top card of their library into their graveyard, and then they create an X/1/1 black minion creature tokens into play, where X is the card's converted mana cost. With this, your opponents would be getting a multitude of minions, and with Toxrill out, they'll be gone by the end of their turn, and you're getting more slug tokens. Next and last is Robe of Mirrors, a blue mana for an aura to enchant Toxrill mostly, to give it Shroud. And we'll get into our land base right now, the fuel to our engine. We'll start off with Command Tower, basically adding 1 mana of any color to your commander, color identity, I should say. Darkwater Catacombs, 1, and tap it to add blue and a black. You get to Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse and Myriad Landscape. I've talked so much in depth about these cards already, but a refresher, for each one of these are the ways to thin out your deck, basically getting some basic lands onto the battlefield tapped, with Myriad Landscape coming into play tapped and then tapping 2 and sacrificing it to get 2 basic lands onto the battlefield. Karn's Bastion is next. This is another card that is very price heavy. You get to tap it for a colorless, and then 4 and tap it to proliferate, but in a land form. So this is one of the hardest ways to get rid of it, especially with the amount of proliferation we have in this deck. Tainted Isle is next. You either get to add a colorless or add a blue and a black, and you can only activate it if you control a swamp. We're also running 14 islands and 13 swamps. And that's how you build Lord Slug. Nothing more really to say about that. And with our deck price, with the added price of the commander and excluded price of the basic lands, the deck price that we have for you today is around $50.88, which makes this budget available, which is within our budget to build around. And so we are able to build this deck roughly for about 88 cents more. But this just goes to show you that you can actually build a very, very well constructed Toxrill deck within a certain budget. Now, without further ado, let's go over some pros and cons of this deck, and let's get into some out of budget recommendations, shall we? So some of the pros of this deck is this generates a lot of mana. Basically, with the amount of mana we're able to produce with our artifacts, or most of our artifacts, we're gonna be in a good position to get Toxrill out very, very quickly. In testing, I was able to get Toxrill out as early as turn 3 with the addition of Soul Ring and a bunch of other cards that allowed me to get Toxrill out very, very quickly. Next is you get making a lot of tokens with this deck. With the amount of proliferation in this deck and the amount of kill creature spells, it's just easy for Toxrill to create that many slug tokens. And there's not only a lot of protection, there's a lot of value and a lot of great value that this deck comes with, especially with the amount of proliferation we have on here and the amount of infect that we have in addition to it to give you that extra win con, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. Not only that, but you're gonna be drawing a lot of cards, especially with a lot of the cards that we mentioned just earlier. You get a lot of value off this deck. and it's very quick to swarm the board, especially with the amount of creatures that we're going to be giving our opponents, the amount of creatures that we're going to be killing from our opponent's side. We're going to be able to get a lot of slug tokens, basically. And we'll go over some cons now. The first con is kind of the most obvious. It's very mana intensive, being that Toxrill is a 7 mana creature, and a lot of the cards that we have are very mana intensive, like Clackbridge Troll is a very mana intensive. Harvester of Souls, just to give you a couple of examples, is also very mana intensive. That being said, like, you could end up in a starting hand with at least 1 or 2 cards that are above 4 mana that you might not even have. In testing as well, I found that you can often get very, very screwed, especially in the early turns. That being said, like, the early turns, it's a lot of development, and I found a lot of the time you don't have a lot of value in the first couple of turns unless you have a Soul Ring and or another mana rock to get out to get some quick acceleration to get on the board. There's not a lot to do with Toxrill. If you don't have enough slug tokens, there's not really a lot to do with open mana. And especially so if your opponent's if you don't have any slug tokens, or if you don't have any extra cards that have proliferation on the field, that can tap for proliferation or can activate with the amount of mana, with the open mana you have for proliferation, you're not going to be doing too much. So you're just going to be sitting idle by while your opponents can just very much kill you, as long as you don't have a counter spell in your hand. And the last thing is it's very hard to compete against faster decks. So with Toxrill, as I mentioned, the earliest I got him out was turn 3, but you can easily get swarmed very quickly in that amount of time. And depending if you're getting screwed or not based on your land count, you could easily fall very, very far behind in your game. Now let's go over some out-of-budget recommendations for this deck. The first is Inexorable Tide. This is just an insane card, and it's the more expensive version of Flux Channeler. Is whenever you cast a spell, not a non-creature spell or anything like that, you proliferate. So even all of your creatures coming to play will trigger Inexorable Tide, and proliferating off the slime counters and the infect counters as well. Next is Contagion Engine. What do I need to say more? Anytime when it enters the battlefield, you put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls, and then for 4 mana and you tap it, you get to proliferate twice. That is just absolutely scary for your opponents. Next is Black Sun Zenith. This is one of we are not running too many board wipes in this deck, and having Black Sun Zenith is very clutch, especially getting around cards that have Indestructible. That way you get to completely reset the board and it shuffles back into your deck. And the last one I would recommend for this deck is Maskwick Nexus. It's another arcane adaptation, but with this you get to also tap it to create shapeshifter tokens with Changeling. So with that, you're also getting more slugs on the field as well. And I'm gonna leave it off here today, guys. I wanna know from you guys, do you like this deck brew? Do you like Toxrill? Or is there any other commander or cards I should be adding to this deck itself? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you wanna support the channel, or you wanna see some more videos off this, don't forget to like this video, share it amongst your friends, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon, because not only would I truly appreciate it, but it'll help the channel grow to a wider audience and expand a little bit further so more eyes can see this content. You can also follow me on my socials. They'll be linked in the bottom left-hand side of the screen right now, which includes my Facebook, my TikTok, my Instagram, and my Twitter. These are the main ways. Oh, hi, Cat. These are the ways you're going to be able to communicate with me on any future video that you want, or if any future ideas you have for any future video. These are the ways to get in touch with me. So go on there and suggest what you want. And last thing before I let you guys go is I post every Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, getting not only the East Coast, but the West Coast at a very, very early time. So you have no excuse to not see these videos. And I'm going to officially announce it here, but for December, each video for December is going to be a Brewing with 50 Bucks episode, but I will be doing a commander from each set that has been released this year, which includes Kaldheim, Strixhaven, Adventures in the Forgotten Realm, and both Innistrad sets. The only one I'm leaving out is Modern Horizons 2. The only reason why is because there's not enough time left in the year for me to get all of these Brewing episodes out. However, that's the official lineup for the end of the year. Starting on December 3rd, you'll be getting a Brewing for 50 Bucks episode each and every week. And then in January, I am more than likely be taking a 2-week vacation. It's just to reset everything, and so that I can provide fresh content for you guys. That's what's going on, and I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please stay safe. I'll see you guys next Friday. And until then, cheers, everybody.